Welcome, everyone, to an exciting new episode of Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and as you notice, the background is different because we are coming to you from Tombstone, Arizona. And I am blessed to have with me a guest that I've been wanting on the show, and I've been trying to figure out where and when would be the perfect time to bring him on. And he happens to live nearby, so we are going to try doing an episode in person for you all. So this is a new thing for both of us and for you watching. So I'm going to turn it over and allow my guest to introduce himself, the one, the only, amazing, talented Jeff Woolwine.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Glad that you guys are here in Tombstone. I almost said Tucson. Tombstone. What are the T's?
It's only an hour apart.
Right? Uh-huh.
Fun of being live. So
Sure.
can you give the audience a little bit of your background of what you are researching and into?
Well, I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been seeing strange things in the sky ever since I was a kid. I can remember playing football outside my front yard, and there'd be an orb in the sky. And I was in the fifth grade, so I went to my grade school friends, and I was like, "Hey, did you guys see that orb in the sky last night? That red light?" And one of my good friends, a Native American boy, was like, "Yeah, my grandfather says that those things live in the mountains over there," and he points to the west side of Arizona, to the White Tank Mountains. And kind of growing up, you have that in the back of your mind, but then you start seeing more and more of these things, and so you want to find out some more answers. And so, on a hunch, on a quest, I started off in 2004. I saw a news report of the Phoenix Lights being back in the Valley of the Sun in 2004, and this was at the beginning of the summer. So in 2004, I hunted out to go try to hunt these things, and I ended up finding them in Mesa, Arizona. And so the whole time that they were in Mesa, they were over this one certain area. And I'm up there recording them, and I'm calling the news. I'm like, "Hey, is anybody else seeing this?" So it took the news about 4 or 5 weeks to get back with me, and they finally did. And we ended up doing about 5 news reports on the lights out there. And the end result was we're all seeing flares 150 miles away in Tucson. Now it's bullshit, because this was right here in the city of Phoenix. It was right there next to South Mountain. So in 2005, I decided to move to the mountain to see if I can get a better shot, and to start hiking the mountain. And lo and behold, I got this apartment, and it was about a mile away from South Mountain on the east side. And it didn't take very long. This black object came out of the sky and proceeded to go down on the mountain. And the next day I went out there because I'm thinking spaceships, technology, a spacecraft. So I'm going out there looking for a crop circle or some kind of any evidence of a spaceship landing there. And what do I find? I find a big boulder with spirals on it and a stick figure man looking up at the exact same thing that I filmed in the sky the day before. Well, so I have always loved history. I've been a history buff, way before I started following UFOs. And I can remember, like, maybe a year prior to that, there was a Native American who worked at the Pueblo Indian Art Museum, and he was like a type of medicine man, if you will. And he was up on South Mountain, and he's talking about the petroglyphs. And one of the people that he was with, he was like on Channel 8 or something. And one of the people that he was with said, "Hey, this stick figure man looks like he's looking up at something above his head." And he quickly turned around and says, "Yes, that's part of the interpretations here, is that our ancestors saw and recorded things that they saw in the skies here on South Mountain." So that just kind of clicked in my head. I'm like, wait a minute. The 1997 Phoenix Lights happened, in 97. And here we're in 2005, and no one's talking about the Native Americans. No one's talking about the petroglyphs. We have strange lights in the sky. Now we have strange markings on the rocks out here. There has to be a connection. And so I ended up calling the guy, and I didn't really tell him what I was doing. I just said I was making a documentary, if he could teach me, the petroglyphs. So we go up on South Mountain. We spend a few hours up there, and he's going over, like the lizard man and the spirals. And he's talking about the spirals are symbols for doorways. And he says when the spiral is going counterclockwise, it's a doorway in. And the spiral is going counterclockwise, it's a doorway out. He says if the spiral ends in the crack, he says that's the doorway to the underworld for the spirits. He says if the spiral ends up, there's a doorway in the sky. It's like a vortex. I said, a vortex? He goes, yeah, it's like looking down into a tunnel. He goes, those spirals represent the locations on where these vortexes or these doorways are located at. But over the years, studying all of this, in the beginning, I said I was filming these lights over a certain location. Well, that location was over a power plant. This power plant is bored down into South Mountain, and it's getting the energy from the fault line. And so basically, over the years, tracking these things and watching them, I've came to the conclusion that they're feeding off of the energy. And so when the Native Americans say they're going down into the underworld, they're actually going down into the fault line to gather that energy. So on the scientific analysis, they're absorbing the energy. And so for like a few more months goes by, and I'm still filming and I'm documenting, and I'm actually matching what I'm seeing in the sky to the rock art. And no one has ever done that before. And so I called the news. I'm like, hey, look at this, and I'm pulling references, not only from what I'm finding out there, but I'm pulling references from the city archaeologist book, what he's drawn, what he has in there. I'm saying, look, And so the news, they always analyze my footage before they hit the air to make sure I'm not hoaxing it or faking it or anything like that. And this is big news. This is a new concept on the Phoenix Lights. No one has done this before.
Right.
No one has matched the Phoenix Lights to the rock art out there. And more I started watching these things, I started noticing, wait a minute, this isn't a spaceship at all. This is something alive. One morning, I remember this flying serpent, this snake, came out of this canyon. And this canyon happens to have spirals going all along that whole canyon area. Well, that is a major doorway. Up on top of where that serpent came out of is a two-man looking up at a flying snake in the sky. And I just so happened to film one, and it went over the apartment complex. And the more and more I'm watching these things, by now, they know I'm there. And they're flying off the mountain, and you can see some of my old videos. They're flying right at me, coming right up to my apartment. And I'm noticing, look, this isn't these things are alive. This is another species, And just at that time, this is before Ancient Aliens, this is before UFO Hunter Show, this is before Skinwalker Ranch, this was in 2005. And one of the people that worked for UFO Magazine was in town, and he had this idea of a show called UFO Road Trip, where he would go and visit people and talk to people, much like what we're doing now, and put it on a major network and make a show out of it. And so his name is Pat Uskert. And so we got together, and I took him up on South Mountain, and I showed him the glyphs, and I showed him the barbell with a man inside of a barbell, and I showed him some of this other stuff that I was filming. And we both agreed that this is something, this is different, And so later on, he went around and he went cruise throughout the United States filming people. He took it back to California, dropped it on the Hollywood desk producers, and they picked it up. And instead of UFO Road Trip, they call it the UFO Hunter Show. And so that aired for about a year, maybe a year and a half, before they wanted to come out and do a segment on the Phoenix Lights. And they called this episode Arizona Lights. And Pat asked me if I would like to be a part of it to show the petroglyphs. And I said, yeah, sure, it'd be great, But he's like, but you can't talk about, if you're going to say these things, you're going to talk about these things, you must say spaceships, you must say crafts. You can't say living creatures. You can't say living beings. He says, you're filming some bizarre stuff and the public isn't ready for this. I'm like, dude, the public better get ready for this because this is what's here. This is something different. Spaceships, craft, aliens from other planet. that's all fine and gravy. But I think what the majority of the people are seeing is something completely different. Well, Jeff, you just can't say that because no one else is seeing this yet, and well, that just kind of blew my doors off, And so we did the segment, and then the producer saw Arizona Lights episode, and he said, "Hey, that'd be a great show idea." So that's how Ancient Aliens got created from the Arizona Lights episode. But instead of using me, they wanted to use Giorgio, and so that's pretty much what happened in that area. And from there, I went on to write a couple books, and I've done other shows like A&E and The Truth Is Out There, and I've done other interviews, stuff like that. And I continued to study these things. And I learned that there was a pattern. Like the first year that they were here, it was like before the equinox, and then like a little bit after the equinox, they seemed to follow the sun. And that seemed to be the pattern. The first year, it was full. The second year repeated itself. The third year, that was it. This was the pattern. And this is what the Native Americans were calling, was drawing on the rocks as far as these light and shadow panels. They would carve these spirals, and they would stack these huge boulders on top of each other to align with the summer equinox and the morning sunrise. And it would cast a shadow over these rocks and cast a shadow through the spiral up into the stone. And this goes on like every year, and right next to it would be a stick figure man with either looking up at an orb or looking up at a diamond or looking up at, some weird thing up in the sky, And so that seemed pretty much what I was doing is I was tracing what the Hohokam were doing. I was doing what they were doing, tracking the sun and tracking these things, and it seemed to work, and that was the pattern.
And what's interesting is I don't know if what you saw came up from the ground originally, but there's talks now where we think of the sun as a ball of hydrogen gas that's burning, and that there's actually in the center is a portal gateway where crafts come through. And so I'm wondering if these creatures or beings, well, I'll use beings because I don't like creatures, so I'll call them beings for my sake, but I'm wondering if they came through the sun one day, went into the ground, and then when the sun hit the spiral, like you're saying, and lit the way, they returned. And so you're seeing them leaving where they might have, and that's why the sun is so important to it, is because that may be how they're coming and going.
Well, here's the long answer to that. Okay, so the more and more I study these things, and the more and more I study the rock art, the more and more I study the Hohokam Indians, the first people that lived there. And the more and more that I read like some ancient texts, I look at this as like a 3 points of credibility. One, we can read about these things anywhere from 3,000 to 7,000 years ago. And then two, we can come out on some of these holy mountains, these sacred mountains, and see the prehistoric photographs of what these ancient texts are talking about. And now we actually see these things for ourselves. And, the story that I'm reading from the text and the story that I'm seeing on the mountains, carved on the mountain, is the same thing, right? There's no question about that. And it tells us what these things are. It tells us that they were cast out, and this is their planet also. They're not from outer space, they're from inner space. This is their world too. Just as the oceanographers are finding new species of life below the ocean, this is a new species of life that has always been here. It's just been hiding for over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And
so when you're talking inner Earth, as in like what some people are calling hollow Earth, or is that a different level?
So when you talk about a hollow Earth, you're talking about somebody like a physical being being able to go into a cave, and that's not what I'm talking about. This is something different. This is something, as some people would call it, supernatural. So there's many carvings out there where it shows a lizard, right? And he's coming out of the spiral doorway. But right before he does, the artist carved it in such a way that he put like this a ghost. Okay, so a ghost came out of the doorway, and then in time he became more solid. And that's what these things like to do. They come down out of the sky, they're solid, they're shape shifting, they're changing shape and changing color. When they get closer to that ground, closer to that mountain, closer to that energy doorway, they start to fade. You can see through them, and then they absorb themselves into the stone. Same way when they come out of the stone. It's like a ghost, and you can see through them. But the more they climb into the sky, the more they can become more solid, and the more you can see it more clearly. So this is not anything biological or anything to do of what we understand. This is another creature. I like to call them monsters, man. Those things are flying right by my window, and I'm getting good looks at it, and they're scary stuff, right? So this is not what we're meant to believe for the past 80 years, as far as Roswell crash, aliens, technology, because we can accept that. We accept technology because we build spaceships and go to other planets, also, right? So we understand that. But if someone was to come around and say, wait a minute, this is different, right? This is another living being that has the power to fly, that has the power to change shape, that has the power to go into solid objects, right? This is mind-blowing stuff. This is the reason why the History Channel didn't want me to talk about this, right? And so now, over 20 years later, they're talking about jellyfish. Well, I discovered these jellyfish back in 2005, And I've always been saying this. Look, this is different. This is a living creature. This is something that is not normal to us.
It almost sounds like there are stories of fallen ones, which
right.
The angels.
You got it.
Fell.
That's it. I don't want to start talking religion because I'm not into religion, but when we look at that book as a type of history book, it tells us what these things are. It tells us who dealt with them, how they disappeared, where they went, and what everything was all about. And that's what the Hohokams are. The Hohokams were the first people that arrived in Phoenix, Arizona. The Pimas called these people the Hohokam, which means the people who are gone, the people who are missing, the people who got taken away. Because they lived here in that valley for over 1,000 years, and all of a sudden they just vanished from history. Not only this tribe, but all the tribes around the world at the same time, they ended up disappearing all at the same time. Pimas call themselves ancestors. They named them, but I'm thinking more of the Tohono O'odham tribe is more inclined to be relations to the Hohokam Indians.
Well, and what's interesting too is talking about it coming up from the ground and becoming solid. The creation stories of virtually every indigenous tribe that I have researched in North America, and I'm sure it's similar to others, but I focused on North America. They said they were dubbed the Red Man because they rose out of the red clay and started to walk. And so that seems really similar to what you're saying is these objects or creatures come up out of the ground, become solid, and go and do what they're doing.
That's what a lot of Native Americans say. They say that they emerged, out from, I believe the Hopis say that they emerged out of the Grand Canyon, right. Things like that. So that's kind of like the tradition, oral tradition of where a lot of these tribes came from is they emerged out of, certain areas. But when it comes to these things, man, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It has everything to do with the energy and the fault lines. And this is their planet too. And so, how did all this go? So I'm up on South Mountain and I'm finding all this evidence. I'm finding evidence of giants. I'm finding carvings of giants. I'm finding evidence of gold, of tombs. Okay, I'm finding evidence of the Mayans being along with the Hohokam in Arizona. And why not? Because back then, Arizona was a part of Mexico. So it's only natural that they would merge, they would migrate this way. And I really started to think that, the Mayans were the Hohokams. So, but these scholars and these archaeologists, they don't want to go that far. Hell, they don't even want to say that the Spanish conquistadors was in Phoenix, Arizona, which I proved that they did because we found 400 Spanish coins on South Mountain, 400-year-old Spanish coins. So yeah, the Spanish was over there. There's a lot of stuff that has been buried and covered up.
Yeah, and what's funny is we have all these mines along the Mississippi where they find all these equipment and tools that seemed like left there, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's recent mining," and they tested and found they're like thousands of years old. And I had a guest on, George Mitrovic in Australia, and he said, when you look at the Phoenician coin, nobody flips it over and says, "There's the Mississippi Valley." They just say, "Oh, there's a river," whatever. But it lines up perfectly to the Mississippi Valley. And he said the reason is you have the Bronze Age. What material was prominent in the Bronze Age? Copper. Where is the biggest copper deposit in the world? The Mississippi River. So all those caves or the mines that they found all this in was Europeans digging our copper in BC, and then you go from, I think it's bronze to iron. Well, copper is no longer necessary, so what do? You just drop your stuff and you go to mine the next spot. And so we were forgotten. And so that explains why we have Viking ruins in Oklahoma when they were never supposed to be here yet. We have, all these ships. And so, yeah, it seems funny to me that they still will argue, "No, these can't have been here." I'm like, really? Because we had people already from across the ocean here before that country even existed, but they couldn't figure out how to get over here? I don't think so. And so it's like our history needs to be seriously rewritten. And I jokingly will say to my friends that I host with in Europe, we have history as old as you. We just forgot our history. It's been denied us. Yeah. They don't want us to know that history. And so that's where I think I love having guests like you coming in and going, "Look, people, yes, history, says this, but look at all of this information backing this theory."
Right.
And I was talking with a gentleman earlier today, and we were jokingly talking about a conspiracy theory about something that happened before 2020, and he goes, "Yeah, those people went from conspiracy theory to actually conspiracy fact." So what needs to happen? And I think it's just more and more people being made aware of, and eventually they're going to have to rewrite. And
so I was finding all this evidence out there, and I'm taking photographs. I'm dotting my I's and crossing my T's, because we don't want to go on hearsay. Okay, hearsay can just take a holiday. We have to verify what we're saying, right? So I was going down the same road with what everybody else was saying, that a huge V-shaped craft went over the city March 13th, 1997, but there's no evidence of this, and all this hearsay of nonsense. And so I instead of just believing what they're telling me, I went to go hunt them down, and I did. And so I was thinking, spaceships, technology, but the evidence was taking me down another road. And I'm sorry, I have to go with what the evidence is telling me here. And they're telling me something different, And so when I was bringing this to the other Skywatchers, they're like, "No, you're crazy. It's always been spaceships. Nothing else was here." This is where the evidence is telling us, dude. Look at the proof here. Look what's carved on South Mountain.
Well, and what I also find interesting is I remember reading Phoenix Lights and all the pictures in the papers and everything, and then being in Texas, seeing this, I was like, "Well, that's really cool." I cut it out, I put it on my wall, and I was like, "This is really cool." But I never heard about Mesa.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all
The lights
that.
are always there.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, it just didn't happen in 1997. Right. And if something, let's look at the facts here. If something going like 6 miles an hour in a mile-shaped boomerang craft, and no video of this, come on. We have 4 videos of what really happened that night. There was only lights on the west side of South Mountain, and what are they doing? They're absorbing the energy from the fault line. Right? So it was people trying to sell books and movies and trying to get famous, saying, "Oh, I saw this spaceship and this craft." There's no evidence of it. And why we have videos of this is because there were sky watchers out there nights before filming the lights, and they were ready for something to happen. That's why that's one of the videos of what we have of what really happened that night, is because we had people looking for the lights. So my point is, if anything was going to fly over the city, they would have got it. Right? But nothing. Only 4 videos of this. If thousands of people would have saw this, I don't care what year it was. There's still video cameras back then. We got 4 videos. Nothing. No evidence of anything flying over the city of Phoenix. The evidence is at South Mountain and the mountains around the valley that are prehistoric carvings of UFO sightings that is telling us what the Phoenix lights are, what their history is, and what our future holds.
I wonder, talking about the fault lines in the area, if you're familiar with ley lines.
Of course, same thing.
And does a ley line cross or even intersect near Mesa?
So we're talking about, all right, so South Mountain here, we have Phoenix, South Mountain, and then Mesa's just like right next door. So, I mean, it's not that far from Phoenix. I mean, it's right there in the same parallel. So it's that same fault line. So the power plant is boiled down into, the fault line of South Mountain. It just so happens to be, around in the Mesa area. So now I'm in Tucson, right? Let's get to that before we run out of time. And so there's orbs going on. It's circling Tucson, right, with the changing of the season. So last year, there's a mountain out there called Mount Lemon. And I picked them up in May. And I tracked them. I tracked them all the way out of the city. From May, June, July, August, November, all the way until October, they were way out of the city. This was in the summer of 2004. And in May, they were coming in at 12 midnight. So by the time they hit October, they were coming in at 4 a.m. Right? And then we had the summer solstice, and now, right before the spring equinox, they're back over here on this mountain, on the Recon Mountains. But what are they doing? They're flying over the mountain, and some of them are going down in the mountain, and they're just a pinpoint of a light. If you don't have night vision camera, they're being stealthy. They don't want to be seen, right? So over here on the east side, they're just pinpoints of light. Sometimes they'll get big. You have to know what you're looking for, and then they're going down into the mountain there. At 7. Then at 9, between 9 and now around 11, they're going out of the Tucson Mountains on the west side. And they're coming out big, huge, orange, amber lights, just huge suckers, man. And everybody can see them. And so I've been tracking them all the way up into September now. And then May, they're going to be over here at Lemon again. So they've made a complete circle. So not yet. We're to that point. We're this close because May is coming around the corner now. Yeah. And they're right here at that mountain. They're right here on the edge of May, right? So now they're going to come around this way. So they've made a complete circle through the changing of the seasons, through the sun, around the valley. And what happened? So I first started seeing them on May 10th, okay? What was so significant on May 10th of 2024? Well, the Aurora Lights was here, all right? The Northern Lights was here. And that's when everybody could see the Northern Lights. Well, the only way we could see them in Tucson is if we took photographs and looked back at the photographs. My wife was doing that, and then I was seeing lights in the photos. And I'm like, what are these lights? What are those little specks of light in the photo? That's when I grabbed my camera, and I noticed the orbs, because you can't see them with a naked eye. The orbs are out there flying around and going inside the mountain and flying around the mountain. So that's when I picked them up, right? And so what is so special about the Aurora Light? Well, it's putting ions and electrons in the atmosphere, Okay, and I believe this is what's going on here because when we watch the lights would come in, a little pinprick, right, coming in, and then they get real bright over this certain fault line, energy line, and then they dim out, and then more come in, right? You got to see my stuff. More comes in, big, bright orb lights, and then they disappear. What are they doing? They're going over that fault line and a combination of the fault line and the ions and the electrons, and they're gobbling it up like Pac-Man, and they're getting that energy, and then they're moving on. So it's like an intergalactic gas station for these things of energy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No one's talking about this stuff yet, right? We're not talking about fault lines, not talking about ions, electrons. When I first did all this, I was so upset with the UFO Hunter show. I was like, damn it, dude, this is what's going on here. Why won't you let me present my evidence? Well, it took me like 10 years to finally figure out that I was 20 years ahead of these other skywatchers, of these other researchers, and it just kind of just blew me away that just now, because now they're talking about jellyfish, right? And now they're saying, oh, maybe these things aren't spaceships. No shit, dude. What have I been saying? And then Pat Eskert, he finally emailed me and he's like, dude, I said, I know. Didn't I tell you about this in 2005? He's like, well, we couldn't talk about that. It was so, controversial at that time, so we just couldn't talk about it. But now they're talking about, well, what if it's not a spaceship? What if it's a living creature? And I'm like, dude, yeah, I know. I discovered that shit years ago, right? And now we're at this point where we're talking about the ions and electrons and the energy and the fault line. And I believe that is what's happening. So we're 20 years ahead of the other researchers now because you watch, eventually they're going to get that same idea too.
And I kind of wonder, because the geo shifting and the north being no longer in the north, could it be the lights kind of was like coming down and saying, okay, guys, here's where you need to be. Here's where the energy is now, because we've shifted. And the reason I bring that up is because I had a guest on about the Nazca lines, and everybody's familiar with those. But she was saying down the coast is a trident that's pointing towards the Nazca lines. And I was like, I was thinking, why would you build a trident pointing the way to lines? I mean, these people coming from space or from inside the earth, they have way better technology of navigation than we do. But then I was thinking about it going, well, wait a minute. If this was formed when the earth was the so-called Pangea continent, supercontinent, things shifted apart, you come up, you may be sitting there going, well, this is where it was last time I was here. Where is it? And you go, oh, wait, there's that marker. Okay, we're going over this way. And so it's like we assume everything's always been where it is, but everything is constantly in motion. So they need markers. And so I'm wondering, like you're saying, the Northern Lights showed up. They showed up and started utilizing the area, going in a circle, that was like their marker.
I think what we're seeing now is stuff that humans haven't seen since the Hohokam, since over 1,000 years ago, and history is repeating itself. And I was living in Tucson for like at least 2 years, before I noticed them in May, and I was living there at the mountain, right by the mountain, and I was always having my night vision out there, and every once in a while we would see an orb heading towards the mountain, or one would leave from the mountain. There was nothing compared to what was going on May 10th. And so it's very possible that it's been going on before that, but I missed it or something. I've been out there at 1, 2 o'clock. I've been looking before I go to bed. My window is facing the mountain, so I'm always constantly, this is what caught my attention on May 10th. And then all of a sudden, damn, there's massive orbs out there, not just 1, 2, but we're talking, like 50 a night, sometimes 100 a night are out there. Just a lot is going on. And I'm like, dude, I'm just thinking that, and we're getting ready to have another aurora light sign, another northern light sighting tomorrow night. That's going to put a lot of energy here. It's going to happen tomorrow night, so I'm expecting to see a bunch of lights out there tomorrow night also. And this hasn't happened, in our area for over 1,000 years. And I think what might have happened, what might have occurred because of the energy that's being poured down, it charged these mountains like a car battery, right? It charged these fault lines, and things are changing. I mean, they're talking about a pole shift. I mean, the pole shift is changing. Things are changing in the Earth. The Earth is changing. So maybe this is the reason why, everything is coming this way now. And now we're getting the aurora lights where we're not supposed to be getting the aurora lights, but we are now. Something's going on. And it's charging that mountain, and it's attracting these creatures to these energy spots. And it's cool too because they're following the sun. That's why they're moving from May, June, July. They're changing, and they're changing times also. So
one thing I'll share with you when you say like why you didn't see them before is I had a teacher that shared with me. She goes, take 30 people in a room and you say to them there's a UFO outside. 10 people won't believe. They'll go outside and say there's nothing out here, and they'll just leave and be like, yeah, this was a waste of time. Mm-hmm. 10 people may go, there's something out there. Not sure it's a UFO, but something's out there. So they see something blurry because that's their filter. And then you have 10 people who are true believers and they go like, yeah, that's cool. Let's go see it. And they'll not only see the craft, but they may see someone walk out of the craft. Mm-hmm. And they'll be the ones reporting the story. And then the other 10 are like, I never saw that. This is all make-believe. Yeah. It's like, because their filter blocks what's in front of them. Yeah. So you may not have been ready to see it. So your filter didn't allow you to see it. And like you said, they've always been there. Mm-hmm. But then something triggered and your filter was like, now's the time. So if switch was flipped and all of a sudden, boom, there they are for you.
It's interesting too, because I've had incidences where like somebody would be standing here and they say, hey, do you see that orb? And I won't see it. But if I come stand where they are seeing, I see it now, So it could be a different position, a different way of looking at, things in the sky because of the position. So you're over here, you can't see it, but over here you do see it. So it's weird stuff that's happening here. The day I died, these things are alive. These things are creatures. This is not technology. I have seen some things in the sky that could resemble a craft. I've seen a flying triangle. It echoed through the canyon walls of South Mountain. It was so loud, it screamed through the sky, and it echoed through the canyons. And I've seen jacks flying in the sky. Could those be crafts? Sure. But what I think the majority of the people are seeing as far as the Phoenix lights, these orbs, and now jellyfish. We call them tadpoles back then when I first discovered them. We call them tadpoles. Now they're calling them jellyfish. These things are alive. They're living creatures. And they're scary. They're scary. They're monsters. Okay? Let's stop beating around the bush, man. They're monsters. They're scary. And the history is telling us that they were the reasons why the Holocaunt people disappeared. Oral tradition says that when the sacrificing stopped in Phoenix, Arizona, because the same stuff we find in Mexico, we're finding in Phoenix. We're finding sacrificing altars, we're finding pyramids of hills, we're finding tombs, right? Same religion, same stuff was going on in Mexico, same stuff here. And then when the sacrificing stops, and it wasn't always a dried up landscape. It was a tropical-like landscape back in the day. And we can find evidence of waterfalls, dried up waterfalls down South Mountain and down some of the other mountains. Yeah. And seashells, right? Right? So this was a tropical-like landscape. But when the sacrificing stopped, that's when things started to die off. Spirits stopped coming around. the sacrifice. We can't eat now. There's no water. Everything is drying up. We stopped the sacrifice. We must continue the sacrifice to keep the gods happy, to continue the sun to circle and its cycle. We must do the sacrifice. But the elders didn't do it for some reason. Legend says that all of a sudden the devil came from the east and picked these people up and took them away. And the petroglyph shows these flying serpents, these flying orbs, picking people up by their heads and taking them off into the skies. Right? And they saw what was going on. And when it was all over with, they vowed never to live in Phoenix, Arizona again. They cursed this valley. They said, if we're going to continue to live in this valley, then eventually we would have to go back to war with these spirits of the earth and sky. So the story goes, they buried all their gold. And the story goes, the gold was as tall as saguaro and as round as the sun. And they buried all that gold in South Mountain, and they vowed never to return. This was a cursed valley now. This is a cursed land. And they went back to Mexico. And for 400 years, nobody lived in that area. I mean, there was tribes on the outskirts, and they saw the lights, and they saw the orbs, and they saw the flying, the Quetzalcoatls, and they were afraid because they knew what had happened to their ancestors. And this was taught by generation upon generations on what happened to their people. This isn't a good thing. And a lot of Native Americans that I've talked to, the true ones, when you talk about these things, either they won't talk to you about this, they'll just turn your back on it. And that's what happened with the guy that was teaching me about the petroglyphs. Because I didn't tell him what I was doing until after we got down on the mountain. And I said, hey, are you familiar with the Phoenix Lights? He goes, oh, yeah, there was the guy last summer on the news. I said, that was me. He goes, that was you? I said, yeah, I have this theory that I'm working on that these petroglyphs out here has something to do with the lights in the sky. But he shut up. He does not go on the mountain with me no more. He does not want to talk to me no more. That was it. All right. So this is the taboo. This is a scary thing. How did I find out about all of this? First year, I'm out there finding all this information, and even I was on the news with the archaeologists, and the archaeologist isn't really telling the truth either about this stuff. That's what got me upset. I went to the library and I said, give me everything you have on South Mountain. They came out with this folder, South Mountain, 1964 and older. And I opened it up, and who was staring back at me but the first park ranger of South Mountain, Charles Holbrook. And he was the first ranger from the 1930s all the way up until the late 1940s. And the Native Americans trusted Charles, and they told him everything that was going on. And he wrote in his journals about how there's gold tombs out there, how the Spanish was out there, what happened to the Hohokam people, the stories of the spirits on the earth and sky, and all that stuff. And this guy did more investigations on Charles Holbrook, dude. I found records of him in different states like California and Utah and New Mexico, where there's files of him, but I can't get into it. It's a sealed up record. So he just wasn't a custodian for South Mountain. This was a big guy. He had a lot of authority. He was a lot of respect in what he was doing. So why would he be talking about in his journals about how the mines were here and how the golds were here? Even his son wrote a book after his father's died. His son wrote a book on how his father was chasing people off South Mountain looking for the gold and things like this. After his generation died, that's when they buried all this information in the library in this folder for 80 years until little old me comes around and opens it up and brings his whole story back to life. That's where the credibility is. Okay, so this is the information that I discovered doing my investigations on the Phoenix Lights. It opened up a whole new book of worms, man, on this topic, and I believe this is credible information because we can see the stuff on the rocks, we can read about it in the journals of the South Mountain from the first park ranger, and now we see it for our own selves, and it's all adding up. Oh, and here's another kicker: why did they make South Mountain a government park? What's the big deal on South Mountain? Why not make the Superstitions a government park? Why not make A Mountain? Why not make the White Tanks? What's so special about South Mountain that we can't go dig stuff up? It's because there's gold there. Because there's stuff there that we're not supposed to know. So they have airplanes and they have security cameras hidden, and they watch all these sacred areas for people like me to come around and try to dig that stuff up because it's a hefty fine and you go to jail for 20 years.
So I have an interesting question for you, and I don't know if anyone's ever thought about this, but so all this was going on while they were doing sacrifices, then they stop and they disappear. If they're starting to reappear, is someone doing sacrifices somewhere, or what's
So
causing them to
that's a good
reappear?
question. That's a good question. So what's the story on these things, right? So Charles Holbrook writes in his journals that he learned from the first Native Americans that when the Holocaust first arrived here in the valley, they didn't know how to live. So these beings came up out of the sand world, down from the heavens, and they taught these people how to survive. Even the Hopis, they tell us that they learned how to weave their baskets by watching spider women weave her web in the sky. So they learn from these creatures, they learn from these beings. And so some Native Americans tell us that we're in the third, fourth, fifth world of getting ready to enter a new world. Every time the world changes, every time there's a new beginning, these creatures are here to help mankind, but is actually deceiving mankind into thinking that they are the ones that man has been waiting for all these years. So if there was going to be like a huge catastrophe, or I can't even say it, or a huge like a war or something where there's no food, there's no water, right? And but they see these things in the sky, and one comes down and he anthropomorphs into a jellyfish, into a man, because that's what the petroglyphs are depicting. They're depicting shape-shifting beings that sometimes look like people, right? So if one comes down, he shape-shifts into a man and says, hey, I'm the one you've been waiting for 3,000 years. Worship me. I can clean up the waters. I can clean up the air. I can give you food. I can fly. You've even seen my angels already. You know, they're coming and going from your energies out there. You know, I'm here now. This is me. Worship me. It's going to happen all over again. It's a cycle. So these things are preparing the stage for our future, because we're going to need these things once again. Look at Egypt. Look at the sun god, the orb above their heads. I mean, look what all the discoveries that they're finding out there in Egypt now as far as the pyramids. They're going to find out that those pyramids are actually energy. They're like a type of conductor, a power plant, if you will, to attract these things there.
So here's an interesting thought for you, is because I know that there are beings out there that will be like what we would call in native term or indigenous terms the tricksters.
Mm-hmm.
So could it be that instead of them being returning and saying, here I am on this person that you're looking for from these glyphs, could they be different beings that are trying to trick us from who originally was on those glyphs, and that the original people may have been actually beneficial, but because these people came and did kind of like an example would be like the swastika, great symbol of hope and everything to the Buddhists. Nazi Germany comes in, makes it a symbol of terror and tragedy and horror. Could these beings be doing the same thing, coming in and saying, oh, we're this, we're here to help, like you're saying, we're here to help, but they have a different agenda. And people are going to go, well, you look like this person, so we're going to trust that you are this person. Meanwhile, the people who are really those people are over here going, wait a minute, we never asked you to worship us. Why are you worshiping? You, that should be a red flag to you that these are not us. And so I'm curious your thoughts on that possibility.
So we match the glyphs to these beings in the sky. And we know from history that the holocoms, when they dealt with these lights, they interacted with them. They learned from them. And then they disappeared from history. So we're seeing the lights now. What does that say about our future? The holocom, they saw it, they dealt, they're gone. We're seeing it. We're about to deal with it. We're going to be gone. We're dealing with two different types of species here. Right? One are good, because we do read in some of these other scriptures and these other texts that it does help. They have been sent down to help man, like find the promised land, things like this. So there are good ones that are here to help. but there are bad ones here, and I believe that the ones that we're looking at as far as petroglyphs all over the world are the bad ones.
Well, that could be another way to look at, if you see this thing grabbing, is it pronounced Hohokam?
Hohokam, yeah.
Hohokam. If you're seeing someone, like we're calling it now, the great time of the Great Ascension, where they're going from 3D to maybe 5D, how would you describe that? And it may be that's the benevolence helping that tribe make that journey. And so we're looking at it as, oh my God, they're being taken away and this is bad, where it could be a depiction of, oh, these people disappeared because they ascended to a higher thinking, kind of like the Anastasia.
Are you talking about the rapture?
Not necessarily the rapture, but
that's like First Thessalonians when it says we will be caught up in the sky to meet the Lord. Well, is that what happened to the Hohokam? The Hohokam, were they caught up to be judged? And I really think that this.
Yeah, I'm not talking religion and
everything. It's not religion.
No, I'm not saying they're brought up to be judged. I'm meaning, so our awareness has opened up to where we can see their world and be like, and understand and be like, oh, and so they're welcoming them to their world and taking them to other places, or inner earth, or to the inner earth.
If that was true, then the witnesses wouldn't be afraid, and they wouldn't tell they wouldn't tell their generations, they wouldn't tell their kids and their kids. Be afraid of these things. This is not good. That's the point here, is because there was witnesses to the Holocaust, and that's the reason why they cursed the land and never returned for 400 years.
Yeah, but I'm theorizing though. I mean, look at us today. Like, if we saw people disappearing and going somewhere, they may be going on a benevolent journey, but those of us that are still here are going to be like, oh my God, they're gone. And so you would paint a bad picture. And so I'm wondering if they didn't understand what they were seeing. And
there's too many texts and references to say that, this is something that isn't good. All right. And this is the reason why some of these Native Americans, they won't talk about this stuff. And
I'm just trying to throw
right.
ideas that everybody.
I see your point. And it could be possible if we didn't have other evidence to suggest that it's something maybe different. Because if it was cool, then we would all know about these things. The government wouldn't be hiding these things, right? They'd be telling us, look, this is wonderful. They're going to cure AIDS. They're going to help us out. But no, they're keeping shush about this thing. They're not going to tell us what's really going on here. They're following these things for way before I came around. They know what's going on. They know the history of these things.
You have better faith in the government than I do. I view the government as they're wanting to control us, so they will keep us in fear and under control and not want to give us this beneficial news.
If everybody told us, hey, guess what, people? The Phoenix Lights took the first Hohokam people away. Isn't that wonderful? How many people would stay in that valley, dude? When they need the people to stay and work and pay taxes and not be afraid. Yeah. So they're not going to tell the truth. They're going to mislead us and saying, oh, these are spaceships, they're aliens, they're crafts from another world, isn't that great? Wow. But they know what's going on, right? So when the shit starts to go down and they start taking people up, they're going to tell, whoever's in charge then, what's going on. They're all going to be afraid and they're going to run into bunkers. So it's not us that's going to deal with these things on Earth. It's the people that are left behind that's going to have to deal with these things.
Right. And I'm curious, we're almost out of time, but you mentioned the triangle craft and hearing it. And I don't know if you're familiar with the TR-3Bs, which are
I've heard about it,
man-made, supposedly UFOs, and they're all triangular shaped. And I'm wondering, could that be what you witnessed? Because I don't imagine.
Can I say something?
Sure.
So I have took a picture of the Phoenix lights, or the original lights, and his lights that he films. I have put different filters on there to try to show if there's a craft in there and you don't see any shape of anything, just lights. That's it. That's
Right.
all you see. No matter what filter I put on it, that's all you see. I cannot bring out any shape of an object that these lights are attached to. It's just the lights, and that's it.
Right. But I was referencing because he had said he had seen going in, I think it was a valley
It was a cloud.
or the
I
cloud.
heard a screaming. I heard a
Yeah.
screaming
So
noise.
I'm
I
wondering
looked up, and this triangle disappeared into the cloud.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you heard one of ours going
I don't know.
overhead. Because I would imagine if they can come up from the earth or from the sky, nobody ever hears them. And so I'm like, the fact that you heard it makes me question, is it one of theirs
didn't
or is it
sound
one
like
of
a-
ours?
It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded like a voice screaming, just like something I've never heard before, and it echoed off the walls. And that's what we're reading. Some of these, some of these texts is some of these objects that they built would fly and would scream like that. So
Well, that's different. Yeah, I don't think we even. It kind of reminds me of Airwolf. You remember that show?
Yeah.
When they put it into the fast mode, it like screamed across.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on and thank you for this time and
Appreciate it. Thank
sharing
you so
your
much.
experiences.
Great meeting you.
Do you want to tell people where they can get your books?
So you can find me on Amazon. Just type in my name, Jeff Woolwine, and find me on Facebook. Find me on YouTube. The Phoenix Lights, Petroglyphs in the Sky, and follow me. And we're following the lights here in Tucson now, and you can see all my research there. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, if you're a fan of Paranormal Versus, that voice you heard was Pam Woolwine. She was on there, and she helped me to arrange this. So I want to give her a shout out to her. And they are here, both of them, to help show me and my guest Rob around Tombstone. So I am grateful, and I just want to give a shout out to them. And if you guys get a chance, follow them. And Pam is with Ghost, isn't it?
Haunted Encounter Adventure.
Haunted Encounters?
That's ours.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wendy's the one that's with Ghost Crew.
Okay. So there you go, folks. You got it straight from the source. So thank you all for watching. And as always, click the like button and leave a comment if you can. It does truly help with the algorithms. I'm getting better at asking for that. And we are going to say goodnight, everyone.
Good.